Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the colonies in the Americas. As this presentation is going on, you will be asked questions to answer along the way. Do your best. You can always replay a part of the slide. And if you guys have questions, raise your hand, let me know. I'm happy to answer questions at any time, or if you're confused, you just have to raise your hand and let me know. So first off, we're going to be talking about the New World. Christopher Columbus believed he was traveling from Europe to India when he landed in North America in 1492. That is why Native Americans were originally called Indians. Nobody in Europe knew North or South America existed until explorers landed here on their ships. And I had a typo, so let me fix that. Landed here on their ships. So what was the motivation for settlers? Why did they come here? One reason was God. They wanted to come to the United States because they wanted to convert natives to Christianity. A lot of natives, none of them are Christian, so a lot of people who were part of the Catholic Church in Spain or Church of England, they wanted to come here and make all the Native Americans Christian. They also wanted glory, which really was to acquire territory. If you have more land, you can grow more food, more crops, maybe have more gold. And that was another thing. They wanted gold. They wanted to get rich. A big one was also religious freedom. In Europe at the time, you usually had to be whatever religion that country was. So in Spain, you had to be Catholic. If you weren't Catholic, you were going to get kicked out, possibly even killed. If you were in the Church of England, if you were in England, you had to be part of the Church of England. If you weren't, again, you'd be fined, you can go to jail, you can be killed. You have to be part of the Church of England. Another thing is called mercantilism, and countries wanted to increase their wealth through trade. The goal of this was to export more than you import. Export means to sell to another country. Import is when you buy something from another country. So usually a country wants more exports than imports because that means you're selling stuff. If all you have is imports, that means you're buying stuff, but you need to make money. You only get money from exports because that's when you sell something. So strategies for settlers. How did they get here, the original ones? The government pays for explorers, like Spain's king and queen paid for Columbus. So some of these countries like England, Spain, France, sometimes the government would pay people money to go explore. There's also something called a joint stock company, and that's where investors buy stock in a company that is going to start a colony. So some company says, we're going to go to North America, we're going to try to grow tobacco, and if we make money, you're going to get money. So people would give these investors money, and if that company made money, it would get to everybody who invested. This was only England, though. England was the only one that did joint stock companies. So settlers and Native Americans, the first settlers, they traded with natives. Natives were growing potatoes, tomatoes, chocolate, cocoa beans. So they would, a lot of the settlers, they enjoyed this stuff. They would trade with Native Americans. They also looked to convert natives to Christianity. And diseases like smallpox killed thousands of natives. And settlers pushed the natives off their land and forced them to move west. So when the settlers came here, like the Spanish, the English, the French, didn't matter if there was Native Americans living here, they would simply say, we want this land, and they would force them to move elsewhere. Next up, we will be talking about Spanish exploration. So this is specifically about the people from Spain. When Spain came to North America, they looked to gain land and riches. They also wanted to convert natives to Christianity. However, they conquered and destroyed native cultures. The Spanish did not treat natives well. They forced natives into labor. They made them build houses for them. They made them build their churches. They forced them into labor. They also forced natives to convert. They did not give natives an opportunity to choose a religion. If the Spanish came, they said, nope, you're going to be Catholic. If they chose not to be Catholic, they would put them in prison, they would kill them. So the natives had no choice but to become Catholic. And settlements, they primarily were in the Caribbean and Central and South America. They were a little bit in the United States as well, mainly like Mexico, Florida. We're going to find out kind of some of the southern states. But mainly the Spanish were in the Caribbean. That's like Cuba, Puerto Rico, some of those islands. But they were in Central and South America. That's why they speak Spanish in all those countries. They often had violent interactions with natives, and this resulted in the natives' loss of land and death in large numbers. And you'll see this several times. Smallpox was the biggest disease. That was the disease that killed the most Indians. There's this little chart right here, and it shows you that in 1520, right here, they believe 8 million Native Americans died in Mexico. In 1545, they think 12 to 15 million Native Americans died in Mexico. In 1576, that number went down to 2 million, but look at the population. They believe there was about 22 million Native Americans in Mexico and about 1,500. But by 1576, there's only about 2 million. I mean, about over 20 million Native Americans were killed in about 50 years. Their populations went down a lot. So the French were much different than the Spanish. They were looking for a Northwest Passage, which was in Canada and the central United States. That's where you're going to find them. They hoped to gain converts to Christianity, so they wanted Native Americans to become Christian, but they didn't force it. And they traded with natives, and they were seen as partners. So essentially, they got along with the natives. They never really attacked them. They didn't try to force them into anything. They actually married a lot of Native American women. However, when the French came to North America, only a few came. It did not lead to large-scale immigration from France. So a lot of people in France, they just never really came to North America. Next, we're going to talk specifically about the England exploration. They were really big into commercial ventures, so they were looking to make money. They had joint stock companies, which we talked about, is where lots of people paid money so people can come to the New World and try to make money so everyone can get it back. They were seeking religious freedom, like Protestants. Protestants in England were being thrown in jail, they were being fined, they were being killed because they weren't part of the Church of England. And they were initially friendly with Native Americans, but they became violent later, mainly over land because the English wanted lots of the land that the Native Americans had. And they claimed territory in the eastern portion of modern-day United States and then expanded west. So that's the 13 colonies that we've already talked a little bit about. Next, we're going to talk specifically about the southern colonies in Virginia. These colonies were settled by people seeking economic freedom, and some of the early settlers were known as Cavaliers. These were English nobility given large amounts of land from the king. Nobility means they were kind of like rich people, they had lots of money, and the King of England said, you know what, why don't you go to the United States, I'm going to give you a ton of land, and you can try to grow some crops there, maybe grow tobacco, grow potatoes, and you can bring them back and you can make money. There was also poor English immigrants who came to North America, and they were small farmers or artisans, and they settled along the Shenandoah Valley or Western Virginia. The very first settlement in the British colonies is Jamestown, which is actually in Virginia. It was established in 1607 as a business venture by the Virginia Company of London. And it was the first permanent English settlement in North America, and their neighbors were the Potawatomi Indians. And the English mistreated the Indians and were violent against them. And Jamestown almost didn't survive. They had very few supplies, the weather was bad, and it was a poor location. It was swampy. You can't grow things in a swampy location. And the way they were able to get workers here is poor English immigrants agreed to work on tobacco plantations for a period of time to pay for passage to North America and southern colonies. So a lot of people in England who weren't rich, they couldn't afford to come to North America, the United States. It cost a lot of money to go on one of those boats, and because they couldn't afford it, they would say, all right, if you pay for my boat ride to the New World, I'll work on your plantation for 7 years. So they were, I mean, you can almost think of it, they were like slaves, but it was just for a short period of time, maybe 4 years, 5 years, 7 years. Eventually, Jamestown did succeed, and the big reason why is tobacco. Tobacco was grown and a profit was made, bringing more settlers and money. And eventually, they needed lots of labor. They needed people to work, and the first Africans were brought to Jamestown in 1619 to work as slaves on tobacco plantations. So we talked about the poor English immigrants who came, who would work for a period of time, but eventually they would, if they worked for 4 years, they would no longer have to work. So they started turning to Africa and getting slaves. And Virginia, in particular Jamestown, it's known for the Virginia House of Burgesses. It was established by the 1640s, and it was the first elected assembly in the New World. And it has operated continuously and is known today as the General Assembly of Virginia. So if you remember, in government, elected means people elected these leaders to represent them. And this was the first elected assembly in the New World. And next we'll be talking about the New England colonies. New England was settled by Puritans seeking freedom from religious persecution in Europe. I told you guys earlier that in Europe, you had to be whatever religion that country was. The Puritans, they were persecuted against. They were put in jail because of their religion. Some of them are killed. They had to pay a lot of fines. And they formed what's called a covenant community based on the principles of the Mayflower Compact and Puritan religious beliefs. And they were actually intolerant of those not sharing their religion. So if you went to New England during this time and you were Christian or you were Catholic or you're Muslim, they would not want you there. They only wanted people who were Puritan. They were intolerant. They also sought economic opportunity and practiced a form of direct democracy through town meetings. And you guys may not remember this from government, but just a reminder, direct democracy meant every single person in the colony voted. So if you went to a small town meeting, maybe they'd have it at a church, and they would say, should we grow tomatoes or should we maybe grow tobacco? They would vote for it. Every single person would vote for everything. That's what a direct democracy is. Whereas in Virginia, what we just talked about, they had a represented democracy. They voted for leaders who then made decisions, which the United States today, we have a representative government. We vote for leaders. We vote for presidents. We vote for mayors. We vote for governor, for Congress, for senators. Next, we're going to briefly talk about the middle colonies. There's really not too much to talk about today. Really, for them, all you have to know for the middle colonies today is they were settled by English, Dutch, and German-speaking people who were seeking religious freedom and economic opportunity. So as you can see, a lot of these were seeking religious freedom and economic opportunity. So the colonial labor needs, when a lot of people first came here, they needed labor. Many labor needs were initially met by indentured servants. These were poor people from England, Scotland, or Ireland who agreed to work on plantations for 4 to 7 years in return for their passage or payments of their debts. So that's what I was telling you. For their passage, that meant the boat ride to North America. It was very, very expensive. There's no way a lot of these poor people could pay for the boat ride. So it would be like today, if it costed $100,000, someone would pay for your ride. But when you got to one of these colonies, usually as the southern colonies, you'd have to work 4 to 7 years, whatever your contract was. Then once those 4 to 7 years were up, you were free to leave. So maybe you can go start your own farm, or you can work somewhere else, but you had to work 4 to 7 years first. However, eventually, people no longer used indentured servants. Labor needs came to be met by the forcible importation of Africans. And the first Africans were brought against their will to Jamestown in 1619 to work on tobacco plantations. So you remember, the people from Africa, they wasn't their decision to come here. They were essentially kidnapped and they were brought to the colonies. And the growth of an agricultural and mercantile economy based on large land holdings in the southern colonies and in the Caribbean and trade in the New England colonies led to an enslaved labor force. So there started to be more and more slaves inside the United States. And this was really because they had large land holdings. One person maybe would own 10,000 acres, so they would need 500 slaves. And this was in the southern colonies, the Caribbean, and even in the New England colonies a little bit. And this system led to the introduction of African slavery in British North America, which this is very important as this course goes on. Slavery becomes an issue. It's an issue for a long time. Even today, there's still things that come up with it. But this is where slavery starts in the United States. And this creates the Middle Passage. And the Middle Passage was a trade route used to transport Africans to North Americans. Africans were kidnapped in Africa and brought to Europe, where they were then taken against their will to North America. So if you look at this map right here, it shows you it starts in Africa. And people in Africa were kidnapped. They were then sent to the United States, or they would go back to Europe, but it was from Africa, and it kind of forms this triangle. And this is considered the Middle Passage right here. And yeah, it's a really bad time in history, especially regarding Africans and slaves, but that is where it starts. Okay, if you guys have any questions, let me know. Thanks.